Let's take a look at dilations on a coordinate plane. This is lesson 4 of Unit 8, Part 2. When will you teach this lesson? Let's take a look at the big picture to find out. So if you notice here, this lesson is only taught in Math 7 Accelerated. It's during the third 9 weeks, and this is a 2-day lesson during week 9. If you're interested in the standards that it addresses, helpful teacher tips, and presentation strategies, all that can be found in the scope and sequence for each lesson. So for this lesson, if you notice, this is Math 7 Accelerated again, standards 43 and 44. This lesson only focuses on dilations, not the other transformations. And the one thing I want to emphasize is that when we perform dilations on figures, the figures are going to be similar, not congruent. So, taking a look at the helpful teacher tips, you want to make sure that you really emphasize scale factor, similarity, and center of dilation for these problems. And also, one of the huge things that students should really have down pat once they finish this lesson is that they should know that anytime the scale factor is greater than 1, that's going to create a larger image than the original. Whereas if the scale factor is between 1 and 0, that will create a smaller figure than the original image. Okay, what about presentation strategies? The one thing I want to emphasize from this, it's at the bottom, and although not explicitly stated in the directions, in order to fully meet the standard, it is important to discuss writing these dilations in coordinate notation. Ask students to write each rule in coordinate notation throughout all examples and practice problems. And we will talk about that here shortly. Next, let's take a look at the lesson. On the left, we have page 1 of the lesson. On the right is just one of many sheets that look similar to this lesson, so I didn't place all of them on the slide, but there's plenty of practice in this lesson for dilations. So on the first sheet, it just wants to get them familiar with some of the vocabulary, but it's very important that you follow the instructions listed on the worksheet. So number 1, draw 4 points on the smaller circle, not inside the circle, and label them E, F, and G. And we'll see why that's important here in just a minute. So there are my 4 points, E, F, and G. Next, we're going to draw rays from point P, which is the center of the circle, through each of those 4 points and extend it beyond the larger circle. Okay, number 3, label those points where the rays meet the larger circle as E prime, F prime, G prime, and H prime. All right, so once we get this done, there's a table at the bottom of the page, and it wants you to talk about the distance between P and each of the points on the smaller circle, which is represented with an S. So if you take a look at the figure, if you count the rings, each of these rings count as 1 unit. So each of those points are 2 units from the center. And remember, in step 1, it said to draw it on the smaller circle, not inside of it. Okay, next, if we count the distance from any of these points on the larger circle from the center, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So all 4 points are 6 units from the center. So the one thing that we want to discuss is scale factor for this. And so the question is, what is the scale factor that takes the smaller circle to the larger circle? And it's very easy to see by looking at the numbers here. And a scale factor is always multiplied, it's never added. So we want to know, what do you multiply the smaller figure by in order to get the larger? And of course, this image has a scale factor of 3. Next, the rest of the problems are all polygons. And so what the students will have to do is they will have to identify what the scale factor is. And all of these that will work on this lesson have 0, 0 as the center of dilation. So that means we won't have to adjust it other than paying attention to this scale factor. So I want to go through and find the order pairs of the points on the polygons that are given, in this case a triangle. Then we're going to take a look at the scale factor. This one has a scale factor of 1.5. Now, here's the coordinate notation rule. And so this is what you want to get your students used to seeing and writing. And so here what we have is the original order pair. And then what we're doing here is we're mapping it to say, what are we going to do to this x in order to get our new x value? What are we going to do to the y to get the new y value? So for both of these, since our scale factor is 1.5, we're going to take each x coordinate and multiply it by 1.5, and then take each y coordinate and multiply it by 1.5, and that will give us our new coordinates. So as you can see here, each one of these points, the x and the y were both multiplied by 1.5. Now we'll plot those points on the graph. Also notice that this is x prime, y prime, and z prime so that we can distinguish these points from the original points. And then we'll connect all those points in order to form the dilated figure.